Link, and welcome to the Music Link. This week on the Let's Link project, I'd like to welcome the Lawrence University Conservatory of Music's bassoon teacher, Carl Rath. Thank you so much for being here, Carl.
Thank you for asking me. I'm really excited about this.
For everyone watching, Carl is the Emeritus Professor of Music at the University of Oklahoma, and I first met him 15 years ago when I took a bassoon lesson with him there. Carl, please share an overview of who you are and what you do as a professional musician.
Okay. Well, I'm a college teacher, professor, been doing this ever since I left undergrad school. And currently I'm teaching bassoon, coaching chamber music ensembles, and I teach 2 classes in popular music. As far as a professional musician, I perform with faculty colleagues here. Currently I'm in a trio for oboe, clarinet, and bassoon, and I play on other faculty recitals. In the summers, I teach and perform at 2 different music festivals. One is Red Lodge Music Festival in Montana, and I've been on that faculty since 1980. And also, I am now the one of the 2 bassoon instructors at the Sewanee Summer Music Festival in Sewanee, Tennessee, and I've been doing that since 2017.
Carl, could you share about where you grew up?
I can. I'm an Okie. I was born in Oklahoma City, 1953. But my father, who was working for the Joseph Schlitz Brewing Company, had a heart attack. And back in the 50s, when you had heart attacks, it was basically bed rest. So, and you have to change what you were doing. So they moved him and the family up to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I actually lived in Greenfield, a suburb of Milwaukee, all the way up to about junior high, and then we moved into Milwaukee. So I changed schools, and so I was raised basically in the Milwaukee area. And let's see, you asked here if I ever visit where I grew up. And so the answer is yes. I mean, obviously I went back and taught at Oklahoma for 31 years, so that's a very long time to visit. But also since leaving in 2012 to come back to Lawrence University, I have been back 2 or 3 times because I was a member of the Bright Music Chamber Ensemble, and so I was still doing that performing. And so 2 or 3 times since coming back here to Lawrence, I went back to Oklahoma. I get down to Milwaukee. I have family still, niece and nephew down in Milwaukee. So I get down there for the holidays, except for this year, obviously, because of the pandemic.
Hmm. How were you first introduced to music and playing the bassoon?
Well, I was first introduced to music, and I heard this obviously after I grew up a little bit. My mom used to put a radio next to our cribs. I have 2 older brothers, much older brothers, 7 and 9 years older. And apparently, what possibly could have helped develop our musical ear, because all 3 of us were musicians to a point. And so it's possible that by listening to the radio, she said she did that so that we wouldn't be frightened at night by ourselves. So I always kind of attribute my interest in music, perhaps at the very, very early ages as a baby, to that radio. Now, I don't know if it was talk radio, because in the 50s, you got a lot of talk radio, but you also got a lot of classical radio. I mean, this is before rock and roll, so that didn't come in yet. But let's see. It's also when I was a young child, my older brother is a pianist. He's a phenomenal pianist, actually. And of course, he was 9 years older than me, so he was studying piano. And I would crawl underneath the piano. We had a small grand piano, and I would fall asleep at night underneath the piano, and then somebody would have to carry me upstairs to the bedroom. So I think both of those are ways that I got introduced to music, but also my whole family was musical, and that was a big part of it. My dad was a drummer. He was a great Dixieland jazz drummer, but in Milwaukee, Dixieland jazz isn't that big, but polka bands are very big, and so he played in a lot of polka bands. My mom played piano and organ by ear, so we had an organ and a piano in the living room. As I said, my older brother is a fantastic pianist, and my other older brother was a trumpet player. Both brothers played accordion in the 50s. They even had accordions with their names on them. I don't know if they were any good. I probably was just a baby at the time. And then the piano playing brother also played clarinet, and he played bassoon. And that's how I found out about the bassoon.
Wow, Carl. Could you share more about the other instruments that you play too?
Well, like I said, I started on trumpet because my second oldest brother had started on trumpet and played trumpet for a few years in grade school band. So we had a little cornet, and so I started in fifth grade on trumpet, cornet, and just studied with the band director at the time. Milo Phelps was his name, and this was in the summer before fifth grade, I believe. And so I was actually a trumpet player for a very short time. And it's kind of a funny story how I chose bassoon, but I was in fifth grade and the guy next to me was in sixth grade, and we were kind of kidding around, and I did something to him and he said, "I'm going to get you for that." And it just happened that the band director came in and said, "We happen to have two new instruments, two new bassoons." They were Linton plastic bassoons. I didn't know anything back then. They were horrible, of course, but back then, most people didn't even know what a bassoon was in our band. But I did because my brother Edward played bassoon. In fact, he was playing bassoon up here at Lawrence University, where he was a student. He came here and studied and taught here as well. So I quickly raised my hand because I wanted to get away from the sixth grader next to me. And the other bassoonist, or the other person, was a clarinet player that decided to pick up the bassoon. So that's how I got into bassoon. Around the same time, and we're talking about fifth grade, so I must have been about 10 years old, I had access to a drum set because of my father. And so I would get down, and the Beatles came out at that time in 1964, and so I would go downstairs and play along with the Beatles and other rock and roll that was happening. And I shunned my father, unfortunately, completely, and it really was a big mistake in my life because I was at that age where I didn't want to play his music, and I wanted to play rock and roll. And he would come down very often to the basement where the drums were to watch me play, and as soon as I saw him, I would stop. You know, it was the biggest mistake probably of my life musically because my dad was fantastic. And a few years later, I started appreciating that. But I wish I had appreciated that in fifth grade because he was so good, and there's so much he could have taught me. He was just fantastic. But and he taught at music stores. And even in high school, after I did start taking some percussion lessons, drum set lessons, he started having heart problems, so I ended up replacing him when I was a junior or senior in high school, teaching drums at the music store in Milwaukee, one of them. So that's how I kind of picked up those instruments. And those are, other than, studying as a music education major, you have to study all the instruments. So, but I don't really count those as instruments I can play. Although I have over the years taught flute at music stores, percussion, of course, because that was kind of my other major. And I fortunately didn't have to study or teach clarinet or saxophone. I couldn't play that very well.
How did your brother get introduced to the bassoon?
That I don't know. He was a clarinetist in the band. He went to the same grade school I did, except it was 9 years earlier. So he even had the same band director, Milo Phelps. And so when I came in, normally you couldn't be in the band until sixth grade. But because my brother had done so well, they allowed me, and there was one of my peers, a girl, whose sisters were in the band before her. And so she and I were the only two that were allowed to come in fifth grade because of the quality that our brothers or sisters or siblings basically did. And so I think what happened when he went to Greenfield High School in the late 50s, that was a brand new high school at that time. And I think that's where he started playing bassoon more regularly. And then when he came up to Lawrence as a piano major, you still had to play, I think, 1 or 2 years in an ensemble, even if you were a pianist. And so he played bassoon in the Lawrence University Band, which was conducted at that time by the same man that conducted me in the band 9 years later and was my bassoon teacher, actually. But he wasn't a bassoonist. He was a clarinetist, and he played flute in every one of my lessons. So interestingly enough, when I did come to Lawrence in 1971, my brother was on the piano faculty. And you know how you take entry exams to get into placement for music theory. I actually placed into his music theory class. But they thought that wouldn't be a good idea, and I would agree with that. So they actually bumped me up into the honors section, which was loaded with fantastic ears, basically, because it was all based on the ear. I was all right with the written stuff, but I struggled with the ear training and sight singing, as many people do. The written stuff was great, but fortunately for me, I didn't have to worry about my brother flunking me in music theory, for one. But I also had the most phenomenal music theory teacher, Marjorie Irvin, who was also on the piano faculty. So, you know, that was kind of how I got involved. But I've actually found a picture of my brother playing bassoon in the orchestra, in the band here at Lawrence University from 1964. He was in an archive. So we both ended up. And another time, I remember he came back from Lawrence on a vacation or something. He had to come back to Milwaukee. And he got called in to play in the, I don't know if, I think it was maybe the Milwaukee Civic Orchestra. So it was before they became the Milwaukee Symphony. And he was asked, you know, he borrowed my bassoon, that plastic Linton bassoon, to go and play extra in this orchestra. And I think that orchestra did morph itself into the Milwaukee Symphony later in the 60s. But this would have been probably around 1964, 65, when John Anello probably was the conductor.
Thank you so much, Carl. Did you always know that you wanted to pursue music as a career?
No, actually, we had the Milwaukee Braves baseball team when I was growing up, and I was, even before starting into music formally, I was just nuts about baseball. I had a little baseball game, and actually I think I still have the little score sheets that I would make up. And the one of our neighbors was the manager of the county stadium where the Milwaukee Braves played, and his wife would take the neighborhood kids for free to games once or twice in the summers. So I grew up idolizing Henry Aaron, still a person I would love to meet to this day. I think he's the world's greatest baseball player ever in history. And Warren Spahn and all these great old Milwaukee Braves. So I was really planning to be a baseball player. I was actually a pitcher myself in Little League and on softball teams, and I just loved baseball. I would go outside. I didn't have anyone necessarily to play with because my brothers were quite a bit older than me. And I would just go out with a bat and I'd pick up stones in the front of the house and pitch them up and hit them, practice hitting them. I'm sure the neighbors probably didn't appreciate finding stones in their yards, but that's what I was going to be when I grew up. And I actually found a little essay that I composed as an assignment, like I think in 7th grade, maybe 6th grade. And it was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you had to pick two choices. And and I read this. I don't know where it is right now, but it was a few years ago. I actually found it, and I was reading and just laughing because one was to be an orchestral musician, where you can make almost $2,000 a year, uh, and that was one of the things. And the other thing, surprisingly, was I wanted to be a computer programmer. This is well before people knew about, home computers. There was no such thing. Computers back then took up a whole room like this room I'm in right now. They were massive things, and they didn't have 1/100th the power that we have now on little desktops. So I found that very interesting, but I think I must have read an article in like the Highlight magazine that we used to see, or whatever it is. The Weekly Reader, I think, was another one that we had in school. And I probably read something about computers, and that was my interest in that. So I I didn't know I was going to go into music, but I've always wondered about this because I kind of played in junior high. I continued. I was the drum major my senior year in high school, as many bassoon players end up being. But I also had been in the percussion section. And it just seemed like I'm going to go to Lawrence University because my father went there, my brother went there and was there. My other brother even went there, but he didn't finish there. So it just seemed to be, I've always wondered, why didn't I look into going and studying at Northwestern? Or Milwaukee had Robert Thompson, fantastic bassoonist. Madison had Dick Lottridge, fantastic bassoonist. And it's really weird that I didn't go there. I think part of it was at the time Madison was quite a radical campus, and I was kind of more on the conservative side. But I never applied to any of those schools where there were these really great bassoonists. So I just went up to Lawrence, and I was lucky enough to get in because I was a bassoonist, not because of my grades. And I studied with the band director, who was a clarinetist, and like I said, he played flute in every one of my lessons for 4 years. But he was the greatest teacher I ever had, and I'll probably talk about him a little bit later.
Yeah, could you share more about your studies and your teachers and how they influence you along the way?
Well, typically you start into elementary voice, singing little choirs. Each class has a choir. And I loved singing. I started singing when I was like 3 years old, and I would sing everywhere. I used to I remember one time putting on a little concert in the backyard when I was about 6 or 7 years old. My big ender was Somewhere Over the Rainbow because that was my favorite movie, was The Wizard of Oz. And I just loved singing. I loved singing Christmas carols during the holiday season. I had a little bit of a problem because I couldn't say R's. They were more like W's. So I had a little bit of a speech impediment. I couldn't say S's either. So I said, it came out the side of the mouth. And my R's, when I introduced myself, I was Wath because I couldn't pronounce an R. So Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was one of my big songs that I sang and all that. But I sang on local television with my brother accompanying me when I was, it was a show called The Other 98. I sang the first Noel, and somewhere I think I even have a film of that. And then in second grade, ta-da, here's my second grade class, by the way.
Oh,
Uh, that's me up there. Second grade, and I had a big crush on Miss Vyshek. She was a student teacher from Northwestern. Um, and they did a talent show. And I sang Somewhere Over the Rainbow for the talent show with my brother playing piano. He was in high school. I think he was probably a senior at that time in high school. Or wait, no, he would have been in ninth grade. So he was in his freshman year of high school. So anyway, that's that was something that was very meaningful to me. I loved singing. My teacher was Frank Dominguez, who was a very good singer. I just went to pay my respects to him. He passed away at about an age of 93. Fantastic, great teacher. That's the big thing. I think the reason I went into music is I always enjoyed music. I always enjoyed my music teachers. Some of my friends didn't always enjoy them, but I did. Milo Phelps, as I mentioned earlier, was my first bassoon teacher. He was the band director. He was a saxophonist, but band directors, they teach everything. And he was fantastic. And then when we moved to Milwaukee, Milwaukee had a very interesting situation. At the junior high, the director in the band my first year in 8th grade was a clarinetist, but he was kind of a woodwind specialist. Ronald Munson was his name. But they also had a rule there that if you were in the music program, instrumental, you had to take Saturday morning lessons at another school, Pulaski High School. And so for $3.50 for the whole 15 lessons, not each, but the total, because I was using a school instrument, the bassoon, I went down every Saturday morning and took lessons with a nurse who used to play bassoon when she was in school. I think she went to Butler. No, she went to DePaul University in Greencastle, Indiana. And she was actually trying to get me to go there. She even paid my registration, when you apply, application fee. I didn't obviously go. And then in high school, we had great orchestra director, Dick Menike, who's now passed along, and George Serwin was our band director. I liked him. He was a fine clarinet player, played jazz, but I got a lot out of him. I really respected him. And so I really never studied with the bassoonist until I went to grad school.
Carl, could you share more about any realizations or things that you've learned about the music industry since teaching in academia and then also working professionally in orchestras?
Well, I think the biggest thing is getting along with people, getting along with your colleagues, and not to make up for any insecurities or deficiencies in your playing. I mean, you have to, if you're in a playing ensemble, you have to be prepared. And being prepared means coming to that rehearsal, all the rehearsals, and certainly the concert, 30 to 45 minutes before, and being prepared to play and knowing your part. So I think that's crucial, and it's also crucial when you're teaching. I've done nothing but college teaching, really. I was a band director for a year at Ripon College here in Wisconsin before getting the Oklahoma job. And I was also still teaching at Lawrence University, where I replaced my teacher when he retired. And I did that for 3 years. And before that, I was the percussion teacher at a university in Louisiana, at Northwestern State University. One of the ways that you can get along with people is to get their respect by knowing what you're supposed to do and doing it to the best of your ability. You're going to make mistakes. You have to accept that. It's, no matter how good you are, every once in a while you're going to make the wrong decision, and you have to take responsibility for it. But as long as you prepare yourself as a professional, people will respect you.
Carl, have you ever thought about changing careers along the journey?
Yeah, when you first come out, you get a lot of rejections. I had a master's degree. I applied. I was at the University of Denver, Lamont School of Music for my graduate work, and I was a GTA in music theory. I was accepted at Indiana University to study with Leonard Sherrill, who I really wanted to go and study with, but they didn't offer me any money. I was accepted at Iowa, which had a fantastic contemporary music program at the time. They offered me a $1,200 loan, and then I got called up out of the blue by the University of Denver, and they offered me a GA, accepted me before I even applied, because I had never applied there. And it was a GTA in theory. Interestingly enough, I went to all my theory teachers at Lawrence, and they said, "Oh, your piano skills aren't strong enough, don't take it." But I went to my brother, who was still on the faculty in the piano department, and he said, "Take it, practice piano." And so I listened to my brother, as I normally do. And I took it, and I was very successful there. Everyone wanted to be in my ear training sessions. And of course, I had phenomenal training at Lawrence with my teacher, Miss Irvin, and Mr. Ming in sophomore theory. So I just taught it the way I was taught. And I got along great. And so a lot of people kind of transferred into my sections of theory. The second year, I was actually given my own sections of theory to do the written, ear training, and sight singing, as well as assisting in sophomore ear training and sight singing. So I guess, did I ever consider doing something else? Yeah, because then when I started seeing a whole bunch of jobs open up for bassoon teacher at the universities, and I applied, and now I know why I never got it. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. I didn't have any experience. And when I would talk to people and they would tell me that, I said, well, how do you get experience? I'm applying to get experience. And this happens to everybody when they come out of school and they're in their mid-20s or early 20s. How do you get experience? Well, yeah, you can go and apply and probably be a junior high band director, which I could have done, and I was thinking of doing that. When I got out and got 6 rejections right away from various schools, and I applied. Interestingly enough, the Louisiana school, my brother was teaching piano there at the time. He had left Lawrence and was teaching in Louisiana, and they had a double reed job open, and I went and I applied and played for it, kind of an informal interview audition, and I didn't get the job because the person before me was an oboist, so they really wanted an oboist to teach the double reeds. 3 days later, I get a call and they say, we're really embarrassed, but would you come and teach percussion? We know you have a percussion background, which I did. I was kind of a percussion major for my music ed part, and I love percussion. But I had already decided bassoon was going to be my main focus. I said, well, yeah, I'll do it, even though my brother knew that I had already been denied the double reed job, and then he was off in Europe playing and administrating. And so I moved down there. I got paid $3,000 for the year. The job that I would have had was $15,000, which was plenty of money. And my brother, when he found out that I took the job, he said, I would have advised you not to take it, not for $3,000. But I thought, well, a job's a job, plus I'd be near family. And so I did that for the year, and I ended up teaching bassoon because the oboe person that got the job couldn't do bassoon. And then I ended up volunteering with the band, so I was the assistant band director, and I formed a percussion ensemble, and I helped out with ear training and sight singing because that was my specialty in grad school. And then I moved back to Denver without a job, and during my time in grad school, I had picked up a job in the summers the first year as a men's clothing retail person. And I was professionally trained as a men's suit fitter. And I loved it. I had a great manager, John Wright, who was about 25 years older than me. Great guy. We became very good friends. He even loaned me his VW car when he went on vacation, so I didn't have to take the bus in Denver. And we just became very good friends, and I worked there for about 20 hours a week while I was doing grad school and doing the GA. And then when I left to go to Louisiana, of course, I gave up that job. But then when I came back, I had no job because they had already replaced me. So I applied somewhere else, and I got, again, the suit salesman job there. Was doing very well. About a few weeks into that, I came back to Lawrence to my teacher's retirement party. And while I'm sitting there, the dean comes up and he says, do you happen to have any theory teaching experience? And I said, yes, I do. That GTA experience at Denver. And he said, well, we're going to have a one-year position in bassoon and theory. And they brought me in for an audition. I think I was the only one they auditioned. and I got the job. So that was how I came back to Lawrence to teach. And it was a 1 year position, and then they kept me the next year at halftime. So I went back and sold suits at Gimbel's. I was in the Oshkosh Symphony and the Fox Valley Symphony. I was the librarian for the Fox Valley Symphony, and I was teaching flute and percussion at a music store down College Avenue. And then the next year, they changed it to 5/6 time. So I was still teaching bassoon and woodwind methods. So I was teaching all the instrument technique classes. And I was in charge of all the recording activities at the school, which meant also the program that went out to national radio. And at that year, they had an opening for band director at Ripon College. And I applied and I got it. So I did that as well. And I loved it. But then the next year they were going to take me back down to halftime again as far as pay goes, but I would still do the same thing. And I said, enough's enough. I had already been in touch with somebody from Oklahoma, or they contacted me, and I had already turned them down saying I wasn't interested because I was very happy doing what I was doing. But when Lawrence came and offered me something for half the pay that I was getting paid to do already, that was enough. And I'm an alum. You would think they would give me more of a nicer consideration. So I quickly called up to Oklahoma, and they said, as long as it's postmarked before April 15th, which was the deadline, we can consider it. And so I did. I was up for the Oklahoma job with two other fantastic bassoon players, Rod Ackman, who actually now has replaced me at the University of Oklahoma. And it's really interesting. I can't remember the third person, but all three of us ended up getting jobs. And I didn't know the other two until years later. One got the job at Tennessee Tech, I got the OU job, and Rod got the principal job in Tulsa Philharmonic. And so that's how we ended up meeting a few years later. And then we became really good friends, and he went off to Missouri to teach. I think you've already interviewed him, so you know his background. He's fantastic. And when I left to come back to Lawrence, he applied for the job, and he would be perfect for the job. And he's taken it to a new high. The Sooner Bassooners are at a new high with him. He's phenomenal. So anyway, so yeah, you're going to come across these times where you just have these little jobs and you might have to do something else. But I was asked to go into upper administration for retail by two different companies because I really enjoyed what I was doing, and I told them no because I enjoyed working the floor. I liked working with customers. You know, I was a music ed major. I had GAs teaching kids, so I like to work with people rather than be on top, which I've done in the music administration even. And it's a lot of work. I prefer to actually be teaching with the students and stuff like that. So yes, I've done other things. At one time I thought in junior year, junior year in college is a tough year. People are working really hard. Freshman year, they're excited. Sophomore year, they're still excited. Then junior year hits and you start questioning, do I have what it takes to do what I want to do? Am I good enough to make it into an orchestra? Am I getting tired of doing all these music education classes? And that's tough. You're dividing your time from your main love, your bassoon in this case, with learning all these other instruments, and you're frustrated because you're a beginner and you only have like 4 weeks or 3 weeks on them. And so it's just something that you're preparing yourself for, and you have to be prepared and ready. I was just getting really frustrated. I had gone through a relationship breakup. My girlfriend had gone out to USC. So I was really down, and so I considered being a veterinarian. I love animals. And then I realized that's a lot more schooling. So then I thought I would be an animal protection officer because I'm really an animal rights activist, kind of. The problem is I really can't stand to see animals that are hurt. that bothers me a lot. I just turned off a program earlier today because it was, even though it wasn't real, it's just the thought of an animal getting hurt bothers me. So I realized that I couldn't be an animal protection officer. That would bother me too much. So yes, I have thought of different things.
Carl, could you tell us more about your chamber music career?
Well, the chamber music career, I've always loved chamber music. When I was a freshman, I got a woodwind quintet together here at Lawrence. My girlfriend was a junior and she was the flutist. And it was a very, very good group. But even going back to high school, you know, where you have the solo and ensemble contests, you know, we had formed a quintet my sophomore year, went to state, didn't do very well at state, but you know, we just loved it. And so that's actually where I started my arranging career as well, because I arranged Somewhere from West Side Story, is my favorite song, for woodwind quintet. I think I still have the music somewhere in my files. And then when I went to college, I started this quintet that we had for a couple years. And then I did some other chamber music, of course, as we all do. Grad school, I started emphasizing music theory more, so I wasn't really doing anything chamber music-wise. And then when I came back to teach here at Lawrence, it was the first time we had everybody represented on each of the woodwind instruments and horn. So we were able to have the very first Lawrence University faculty woodwind quintet. And so we did that for 3 years. And then I left, and part of my job at the University of Oklahoma was to play in the Oklahoma Woodwind Quintet in residence at the University of Oklahoma. And so I did that, and I started doing arrangements for woodwinds. In the summers, I was playing chamber music with colleagues at the Red Lodge Festival and also in Austria, in Eisenstadt, Austria, for 17 summers. And there was a, you know, it was a classical music program, so a lot of Haydn, Mozart, you know, so we did some serenades, did some other things. And so I really got into, you know, not only quintet, but the octet. So when I went to Oklahoma, where I thought I was going to be a wind ensemble director, that was something that was told me to entice me to take the job. And when I got there, I found out they already had one. So that was a little embarrassing. So I formed my own chamber music ensembles. I had an undergraduate group called the Flatlands Wind Ensemble, which was a takeoff. Back then, the big ensemble was the Netherlands Wind Ensemble. And so this was a takeoff on that. And I had a graduate quintet as well. And so I conducted those ensembles, and we did a lot of the Mozart serenades. We did the opera transcriptions. So I did that for many years, along with playing in the Oklahoma Woodwind Quintet. And again, like I said, at the festivals, we played chamber music. So, and I love coaching chamber music as well. And I still coach here, get asked to coach. So I enjoy that very much. I don't do very much chamber music playing anymore. Like I said, we have this trio, but we haven't met for a year now. And we had just kind of formed last year. But hopefully that will pick up again.
Could you tell us more about your orchestra career?
Yeah. You remember that little essay where I said you can make it in an orchestra and make $2,000 a year. You know, in sixth grade, $2,000 a year is a lot of money. Back then, my dad was probably making $8,000 a year. So we all know what the situation is like. If you're in one of the big orchestras, you're going to make very good money. If you're in what most of the orchestras are, either a regional or a state orchestra like I was in, you're not going to make as much money. You certainly can't live on it unless you live in a tent outside. I was very fortunate when I moved to Oklahoma. Of course, they had the Oklahoma Symphony Orchestra, and the great Betty Johnson was the principal there. She was the grande dame of bassoon playing, actually. She was the first female bassoon player in an orchestra in the United States. Wonderful lady. She was getting near the end of her career, but she had been in that orchestra for At that time, I want to say she was in that orchestra about 40 years. So she was heard on the radio, but she was really fantastic. I never got to play with the orchestra back then. But then when she retired after 49 years, the person that came in was Jim Compton out of USC. Excellent, excellent musician and player. Very different in style, though. And I got to play one time. It was on Symphonie Fantastique. I was playing third bassoon on that. And then when they folded, the assistant conductor, Joel Levine, worked really hard to start up a new orchestra. And it wasn't going to be a full-time professional orchestra, but it was going to try to be professional level, but we rehearse in the evenings and we play, a much shorter season. This is the Oklahoma City Philharmonic Orchestra. And Joel Levine and the people that worked with him, Alan Valentine, who is now with Nashville Symphony, I think, they did a phenomenal job getting the orchestra back up. Many of the musicians had left to go to other orchestras, but there were enough string players left, and by calling on the teachers in the local colleges, they were able to put together an orchestra. I was not involved with that because Betty wanted to come back playing. And so after about 2 years, they ran an audition. I won the audition. It was just a local audition. I remember that was around the same time because I was feeling so down about not being in the orchestra. All my colleagues were in the orchestra, and I wasn't. So I appeased that a little bit, or placated myself, by calling up Will Roberts down in Dallas Symphony and asking, here I am like about 40 years of age, asking him if I could take lessons with him. Because I was going down to hear the Dallas Symphony on the Sunday afternoons, and I loved him, and I loved Will's playing, and I loved the orchestra, and Meyerson was a fairly new place at the time, a beautiful, beautiful stage. And so he said yes, and I would go down and take lessons with Will. And even though I had by then studied with a couple other real bassoon players like Steve Basson, principal in Milwaukee, I took some lessons with him before going to grad school. And then in grad school, I studied with the second player from the Denver Symphony, Stan Scheller. So those were really about the only three bassoonists that I actually studied with in my career, and it was more like after I got out of Lawrence. So anyway, I got in the orchestra. I was still going down and taking some lessons every 2 or 3 months, I think it was. And the first year, Betty and I shared. We were co-principal. And then the second year, she was second and I was principal. So I was in the orchestra for 21 or 22 years, something like that. And I always felt it was a very, very fine community orchestra that was probably very well paid, better pay than what I remember hearing from other orchestras, like the Austin Symphony was making a lot less than what we were making. And we had great management. Of course, Joel was perfect for that orchestra. He was with the audience and everything. It was very personable. Joel was very funny. He was a good musician. I had differences, of course, as we always do with the conductor. And I learned a lesson. I learned a very valuable lesson that I do want people to know about. We were doing the Tchaikovsky Sixth and that opening bassoon solo. I remember, the basses come in with supposedly a fifth, and we usually think of fifths as perfect. This was very imperfect. And I remember coming in on it, and Joel kind of stopped and said, you're out of tune. And I just said, to what? The basses are all over the place. So talk about getting the respect of your friends. They were very upset at me about that. But then I made the mistake of going to Joel backstage and saying, do you have any advice about the solo? Never ask the conductor, because they will tell you, And he said, well, maybe if you could come in a little softer. And I thought, okay, well, it's the low E, right? And it doesn't need to be all that soft. It's the solo. It's marked soft, but you should be playing at mezzo piano, maybe mezzo forte. People have to hear you. And so I tried, and of course it didn't come out right when I needed it to. It didn't squawk, but I never again asked for advice, from the conductor. If he asked me to do something, I would try to do it, but I never asked the conductor, is there any advice you have for me playing this solo? Because they will tell you, and you probably don't really need it. If they have anything to say, they're going to say it anyway. They're the conductor. But don't bring it on yourself. That's a big mistake. So I only did that once, and that was enough. But I've had wonderful times. My favorite times, besides playing with my colleagues in the Philharmonic, was playing in the summers on the same stage that Haydn's orchestra played in the Schloss Esterhazy in Eisenstadt. And I did that for 17 summers as principal bassoon. I got to solo on 3 occasions, either with the Haydn Symphony Concertant twice, and I did the Mozart. And it was I noticed one of the questions is, what's your highlight of your musical career? That was it. Here I am playing in one of the most beautiful halls in the world, if you've ever seen the Haydn Saal, and playing the Mozart concerto, and I received 5 curtain calls. I have it's on the tape. I have over 2 minutes of applause. I kept going out. The Mozart itself is it's my favorite concerto. I think it's a beautiful concerto, and to play it just south of, Vienna of all places, in Eisenstadt in this beautiful hall, and to have all these Austrians really being appreciative. So that was my real highlight. The next one would probably be, I was a quarterfinalist in the Young Concert Artists Guild competition in New York in 1985. I didn't get past the quarterfinal round, and that's too bad, but that was a really neat experience, scary experience. I don't know if you can see, there's a poster right back there. I don't know if you'll end up seeing this in the edited version, but that's our program from the Oklahoma Quintet playing in Carnegie Recital Hall. And that was really a highlight as well.
Carl, how do you cope with music performance anxiety?
Well, you're assuming that I have music performance anxiety. And I do. Everyone does, and you need to have it. Again, it's that dissonance. It's like any athlete. You need to have something, that adrenaline, to get you to not only do what you want to do, but maybe even go beyond where you can. I discovered a long time ago, when I was younger, I shook violently. And on bassoon, that's not so good because you hear a lot of key clacking. I remember a state solo and ensemble concert, our trio, and I was just like this. And, the more you play, the more you perform, the better it is. When I was in school here, we didn't have studio classes. So I never played for anybody until I went out on my very first, it was a student recital, and I did the first movement of the Mozart, and it was in the big chapel because all the other performers were organists. So I went out there, and I was nervous. I was scared. It was almost like, I really don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. But once I got out there, and you play the first few notes, hopefully they go well, it was fine. And it was the same thing almost like in the orchestra. You don't know what's going to happen on the bolero. You just hope you're prepared for it and hope that the reed works. And I've almost always, I would say 99% of the time, been happy with those performances. So the more you perform, I did a junior recital. I also did plenty of recitals on percussion, playing with other people. Senior recital, graduate recital. And since then, I've done a recital almost every single year. Some years I've done two, a solo recital. I think I've done about 80 recitals in my career. Um, and then also about 20 concertos. Uh, so the more you're out there in front of people, yeah, you're nervous. You're in the bathroom, uh, you go out there and you start playing. And for me, it's not that it goes away. And especially as I've gotten older and you start losing some muscular control, um, trying to die out very softly at the end of a movement, and all of a sudden your lips start quivering. I had never dealt with that until the last maybe 5 or 6 years. Uh, the other thing that I'm dealing with at my age, I just turned 67. So sometimes it's hard to get your eyes to move to the next line fast. So, sometimes I'll put the note over here in this index, and a little bit, you have to take care of yourself. You have to see an eye doctor every year. Whether you have glasses or not, you've got to do that. You have to take care of yourself. I think people that, what we do is not any different than what the athletes do. You have to take care of your body in order to do what you're doing for your profession, or else you won't be able to do it. So eating well, which I'm not very good at, but eating well, stay away from a lot of sugar. And I can tell you a really interesting story. When I was teaching at Lawrence the first time in the late 70s, my oboe colleague was George Reardon. And he had a friend that came in and did a class for his oboes, and I joined in on that with my bassoons. This class was all about the effects of sugar on your embouchure. And she had like a fishing weight with a string and a button. And so she would have somebody come up and put the button in their mouth like it was a reed to hold an embouchure, and she would pull it out. And then that would register, all right? And then she would give a cube of sugar for the person to eat. Hopefully they're not diabetic. A cube of sugar, and wait 10 minutes, and did the same thing. 1/2 the control. So if you got 4 or 5, you only had 2, the strength of 2. Stay away from sugar. Don't be drinking like Coca-Colas or any coffee with sugar, anything like that, because it is detrimental to your muscle control. And we have enough problems with just being nervous with things like that. So that's something that I've told that every year to my students, and they look at me kind of funny, like, really? And I tell them the story, and it's not made up. It's a real thing. So stay away from sugar right before you play. I would say 3 to 4 hours before, don't have any sugar. You might not want a lot of coffee, because I used to drink a lot of coffee, and about halfway through the concert, all of a sudden you get the shakes. It hits you. I think it was because I had coffee an hour before. And you add that to the nervousness that your body feels, and you start shaking. So that wasn't fun. So I try to stay away from caffeine, which is also Coke, sugar, and caffeine. So anyway, how I cope with it, sometimes I have to just, I read The Inner Game of Music by Barry Green.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think about the devil and the angel, and how they're talking to you. And it's kind of like you just say to one, leave me alone, I'll talk to you later. And I literally think that before going out. Because otherwise, when you're out there, there's this voice that's reminding you, like, well, you didn't really play that very well, or you played that better yesterday. Things like that are in your ear, and you've got to really fight that. And so psychologically, it does help, I think, to just say, I'm going out, you stay here. To that one. You can keep the angel there. So that's a little bit of advice that I think I got that from the Barry Green book.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where else I would have gotten it, but some people are really good at performing.
Mm-hmm.
They're just natural performers. But I think that even those natural performers feel something, because I don't think they would be very good if they didn't.
Mm.
So you want to use that energy. You want to think of it as energy rather than nervousness. So it depends on how you identify it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If you call it something good,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that helps you realize that, okay, I can do this. But if you're sweating and you just start thinking and dwelling on it more and more, you know. So the other thing I do is when I go out on stage, I make sure I walk very confidently, you know, and I get out there. I don't kind of like walk out slowly like I see some people do, and they look scared right away, because then you're telling the audience, this might not go very well. So even if you walk confidently, I mean, you never know really how it's going to go. Even if you practice more than you've ever practiced before. Um, One of the things I just told one of my students yesterday about it, I said, I probably play everything under tempo 95% of the time, and it's only when I'm in rehearsal with the pianist and out on stage that I'm at tempo. You know, there's no reason to necessarily play it fast all the time, because then when you do mess up, it makes you more nervous that week. I also like it when I screw up the day before in my practice. When I don't, then I get a little worried the next day. It's so when I don't necessarily have the greatest dress rehearsal, that seems to help for what it's worth.
Mm-hmm. Carl, could you share more about your reed making style and any important techniques that come to mind?
Every read is a perfect read. Every read I make is perfect. And I can make any read work. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
unless it's got a crack. I just told my students this today. I said, the problem is not the reed. The problem is what you're using the reed for. So if you
Mm.
have a reed that has good resistance for high notes, and you try to play Peter and the Wolf, or you try to play the Tchaik 6 solo, that's not a perfect reed for that. But if you're trying to play the Rite of Spring or Bolero, and you've got the resistance in the reed, that's a fine reed. That's a perfect reed. And vice versa. If you got a great reed that doesn't have a lot of resistance and easily playing Peter and the Wolf or Tchaik 6, and you try to play the Rite of Spring or Bolero, that's not a perfect reed. So any reed can be a perfect reed.
Hmm.
Now, every once in a while, you get what I call magic reeds. Magic reeds are the ones that play everywhere, from
Mm-hmm.
the low B flat or maybe the low C. Maybe it's a little stuffy on the B and B flat, all the way up to the high E and F. Those I call magic reeds, and I've had a few. Um, so people ask me, well, what shape do you like? I said, I don't know, just give me a shape and I'll make a reed, and I'll play it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'll play on anything. It all comes down to me to one word: resistance. You either need more resistance or less resistance. And I do believe in a balanced reed. That is one thing. So, for instance, and lately I've just been taking reeds that I haven't made. I just buy them and then I adjust them as necessary. The only time I really make a reed from scratch is when I'm teaching a
Mm-hmm.
student, and we do it from the stock. Um, so you take this reed, and basically I believe that from this point on to the tip, it has to be perfectly balanced from one side to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I use a tip profiler for that. And that's one of the greatest, machines that we can have. It's not as important down here Although if I need something for those low notes, or if I'm playing in altitude, I have to do some work in the channels, this area right here in the channels. So here's one of the shapes that I play.
Mm-hmm.
I play another one that's called the Tunaman shape. I've been really into that lately. I think most of what I like is like a Rieger 1A or Rieger 2. I don't like the Donzi wide. I don't like Donzi wide. I just don't like wide reeds. So the Donzi regular I like a lot.
Is there any advice that you can share for musicians just starting out their music careers?
What I usually tell students, because obviously as a college teacher I'm recruiting students, and one of the things I have to tell people, I ask them, what do you want to do? I ask, where do you see yourself in 10 years? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Sometimes, most of them will say if they want to be bassoon performance majors, that they want to be in an orchestra. I say, that's great. I will help you, but there's no guarantee on anything, but you have to do the work. But I will help mentor you, and we'll see what happens. People make it into orchestras. People do win auditions, you know. More people don't win than win, but people do win. And so I tell them, well, I ask them, why are you majoring in music? Well, I had a good time in band in high school. I said, okay, that's great. I believe in having a good time. I believe I'm in music because I enjoyed music. If the Milwaukee Braves had not moved to Atlanta, I would probably be a pitcher in the Hall of Fame of baseball. That's my thinking. But you have to think big. So I never tell somebody that they can't do something. If they want to be in an orchestra, great. That's their dream. And I don't have the right to take away their dream. They have the right to take away their dream or to change it. So, and I've had many students who have wanted that. One student said, I want your job. They want to be a college teacher. Because, when things are happening, it looks really easy. You're a little kid, you hear the symphony orchestra, you hear the bassoon play Peter and the Wolf, and you think, oh, I want to do that. Because it sounds easy. We know it's not. There's a lot of work, but a little kid doesn't know that. So these people come in, they say, well, I want to be in an orchestra. I said, great. I think that's a wonderful dream. Let's make it happen. Let's work to try to make it happen. I get very upset when people come in and say, well, my parents don't want me to be a music major because there's no jobs. I hate that. I hate that. And I've had teachers, when I was in administration, parents would come in, not teachers, parents would come in and they'd say, well, what can you do with a music degree? And I have my degrees behind me on the wall, and I sit there for a while and I don't say anything. I just kind of look up at my degrees. And they go, oh, well, you're good. I said, I'm good because I worked at it and I never lost my dream. And I took advantage of everything that came up that I could afford to. I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't own a bassoon until senior year in college. I didn't have a car until graduate school. And it was cheaper than the bassoon. So you have to have a dream. That's what's going to get you going somewhere. If you want to be something, you have to try for it. You can't expect it to happen. Just because you have a music shingle doesn't mean you're going to get a job in music. Mm-hmm. But I had a friend who didn't get tenure once at a school, and he ended up going into the business world. He had been a band director in high school, and then he was teaching at the college. And he was being offered jobs of over $100,000 a year. This was at a time when the average pay was $30,000. He was in the business world looking at jobs, and he asked him, he said, why I have 2 music degrees, I have nothing but band director experience. Why are you offering me this job at over $100,000? And they said, we love people with music degrees. There's 3 things that happen that no other degree does. You're highly skilled. That comes from playing an instrument and learning to play it and mastering it. You work well with others. That's called playing in an ensemble. you get places on time. That's called getting to the concert. For us, a concert doesn't start at 8 o'clock. It starts at 7:15 or even 7. I was always the second person in the Philharmonic to get to the hall on a concert. The oboist, of course, is always first. She was there at 7. I'd get there at 7:15. Clarinet player, the strings were always the last ones. But the wind players, brass were, of course, wind players, but they got there late too. But anyway, so if somebody wants to be a major in music, I don't try to convince them not to. I try to convince them to work hard to achieve that. I've had a wonderful career, and I didn't go to any big music schools. I didn't study with any major music, bassoon professors or anything. But I got to know them. I got to know Milan Turkovic because he heard me do the Haydn Symphony Concertant in Vienna. I didn't know he was there. He came backstage afterwards and was very complimentary. Ever since then, I knew him, and I'd go see him every once in a while. Same thing with Leonard Sherrill. When I was teaching at Oklahoma, I brought Leonard, and even though I never studied with him, we had a great time together, and we played a duet together on his recital. So, I think that I got to know these people not from studying with them, but when they accepted me as their colleagues, because I was competent. I was more than competent. If I wasn't, they wouldn't be my friends probably. I don't know about that, but yeah, I think people just need to go for what they want to go for and not worry so much about what's going to happen. What am I going to do in 10 years? Well, no one knows what you're going to do in 10 years. No one knows what you're going to do next year. So I just loved music, and I just kept going for it. And I did things. I paid to go to Austria every summer. People said, "Oh, I don't want to go there unless they pay me." I said, "Your loss. I'm playing where Haydn's orchestra played, and I'm getting known by people because every year we'd have different people come in." So I have on my wall in my office a letter from the president of the Vienna Philharmonic that was sent in when I came up for tenure. It's like no one has ever at the University of Oklahoma had a letter for tenure from the president of or former president of the Vienna Philharmonic. It was Rudolf Hansel, who was not only a former president, he was the second bassoonist next to Karl Erlberger, who was a very famous principal bassoonist in Vienna. Hansel was in there from the 20s on. He was very old by the time I met him, but when I came up for tenure, I asked him to write a letter, and he wrote a letter. Former president, Vienna Philharmonic. Are you going to deny me tenure when I have a letter like that? Milan Turkovic sends in a letter for my tenure. Leonard Sherrill sends in, not Leonard. I was up for tenure before Leonard came to visit. But, and actually, I did all that tenure stuff before I got involved with the IDRS. So, you just take advantage of everything you can. And when you get the opportunity, you do the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be the best for whoever's listening to you, but I've been very fortunate.
Thank you, Carl. Is there anyone that you would be interested in seeing interviewed next?
I have some really fabulous former students who are out doing the job, and they are the new generation.
Mm-hmm.
And I can think of 3 people right offhand who
Great.
are out there doing the job. Scott Poole, who did he studied a little bit with me in undergraduate, and then he did his master's with me at Oklahoma. He's wonderful. He's a great teacher, great player. Susan Nelson McNamee was a student of mine at the Red Lodge Music Festival for about 6 years, I think, and then went to KU for her undergrad, and then came to OU for her master's, and then went and studied at Michigan for her doctorate. And Christin Schillinger, who studied with me in high school. I wanted her to come study in Oklahoma. She wanted to get out of Oklahoma, and that's understandable. So she got accepted at North Texas and Northwestern. She studied with Bob Barris at Northwestern. So I don't know if they have already done it, but they are wonderful. And I would love to continue to encourage their careers because, you know, a teacher's job doesn't end when they graduate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I maintain very good relationships with my former students. That's important. But they're fantastic, and I'm so proud of them. I miss them as my students, but it's so fun now to go to IDRS and see them. And this summer, I've put in, hopefully, I got accepted to play a piece. I've had two of my Red Lodge students die in the last 18 months, within 3 months of each other. Uh, One at the age of 49 who had studied with me at Oklahoma as well as at Red Lodge, and another who died at 53. And they were in my early years at Red Lodge, so they're quite a bit younger than me, but they passed away. And so I asked a friend of mine, a composer friend, John Harmon, and he wrote a beautiful piece called Remembered. So I'm going to play that for them. It's a new work, it's not even published yet. I have another work that somebody wrote for me, a clarinetist friend from Hungary, who used to come and teach at the University of Oklahoma on sabbatical replacements. And he's a gypsy clarinetist, and he likes to write gypsy bassoon music and things that I can't do on the bassoon, but I'm going to try. And then Howard Niblock surprised me in a way with a new work for six bassoons, and it's called Deep Sea Explorations. And it's a very minimalistic style piece. And I asked Scott, Susan, and Christin to play with me on it. And then I also asked Erika Chiu, who studied 2 degrees with me. She was the girl from Taiwan. And I asked Shawn Seguin. Shawn studied with me a little bit in high school and then undergraduate. Then he went to Michigan, and now he's doing his doctorate at Iowa, and he's wonderful. And the thing is, I've had all these people come back and be guest artists with my bassoon ensemble. And the neat thing is, not so much Christin, because she didn't study with him in college, so she never played in the Sooner Bassooners, but the others did. And they love ensembles. So Shawn and Scott both do their own arrangements for bassoon ensemble now, and are even published, some more than me. But they all have bassoon ensembles because that was a big part of my bassoon teaching, is having a good time, but also it does some teaching for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I would highly recommend anyone or all three of them, to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for those recommendations. I'm so grateful for this opportunity to interview you, Carl. It's wonderful to get a glimpse into your life and career as a professional musician.
Sure.
For everyone tuning in, keep an eye out for new videos with great bassoon guests every Thursday on the Let's Link project. Every guest interviewed here is hosting a free online Zoom panel discussion the following Sunday, and you can register for Carl's session on the Music Link website. Please like, comment, and share any questions or feedback in the section below, and subscribe to this channel for new videos every week. Check out the Music Link Instagram and Facebook pages for more information too. Check out the Lawrence Conservatory Music website and the Bassoon Studio page for more information to get in touch with Carl. The Music Link is a New Zealand-based online resource for people to share, learn, and connect. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.